Chapter 4. The Cone of Glass and Fire. Now it was like the torture of hell's womb itself. The only words he could find to describe the feel of the furnace heat as it encompassed him for the first time. Yet the soft, beautiful, diffused red and then bright yellow glow of the inside of the strange-shaped pots, like immense salt pigs with fire inside, nearly the heart of the furnace itself, in the centre it looked to him, numbered around and above. Pot 3, 4, 5, then out of his sight round the central hub, below which the furnace lay. The numbers had been hand-painted, large in black, and in true Sterling style. Even that detail was performed professionally and artistically. A signwriter's hand, he thought. He'd seen one once, carefully executing a new shop sign in Stourbridge, using a large stick with a leather knob on the end and to steady his hand. Mr. Craven had said, anyway. And yes, he thought, this looked the same. All the way around, in front of each pot, small groups of men were working fast, glowing molten lava radiating out from blowing rods and poles. If cooling too much, being returned to the fire for a short time in short holes with intense fire inside, and miraculously, as they were worked again, becoming changed into perfectly and elegantly shaped vases, bowls, jugs, tumblers, glasses for wine, and goodness knows what else. The teams, or chairs as they were called, were moving so fast it was hard to believe anyone could keep it up in the furious heat. Up to this point, his own rather impassioned curiosity to see all that was occurring had managed to keep him alert and awake. Everything was far, far more vivid than the pictures of awed anticipation, and he marvelled at all that he saw. He had been learning words about glass and about fire recently with Mr. Craven. And now he could see how to use them all. The gaffers of each team were sitting in their special chairs, long bars extending and protruding therefrom, rolling the slightly wobbling incandescent formations around and shaping the still glowing items, made of light, not really liquid, but not properly solid, perhaps like God creating their world, he thought. He could look nowhere else. It fascinated his eye to see them ablaze, his heart already in them, and he longed to have the power to create them himself. Felt himself do it, shape the light, give it power. He was gasping. Never had he seen anything such a marvel, and forget all else he did for gazing, trying to take it all in. No wonder the men kept their jobs as long as possible, and the process a secret, an enigma from others. Firstly, he could see the skill involved, and more importantly, He now realised just how impossible it would be to adequately describe the beauty and enchantment of what he saw around him. Strange close around the forehead caps with a pointed top that sometimes flopped a little truly turned the gaffers from working men into wizards performing magic. He didn't understand why they had the strange shape, except he knew already that they were useful to keep the sweat from falling into the wizard's eyes as the most intricate and delicate work was achieved. Unfamiliar tools, some like long tongs for a hot washing tub, others like large compasses for huge blackboards, and yet others that reminded him a little of shears for sheep, springing outwards when not in use. Then he saw a pair of oddly shaped scissors that were used to cut the glass to shape sometimes, and even small compasses. Oh, which actually seemed to be for measuring. Thank goodness. Up until then he had thought these wizards had finished it all by eye, when he realised now, of course, that the repeated precision meant they had to measure things. He felt a fool for dreaming it had been possible any other way. He remained close to the outer edge. For one thing, he didn't want anyone to trip over him. For another, he found it was simply so hot to the uninitiated that he could not possibly make a closer step towards the fire itself. And they were all working so hard. He felt he could not stop them. They might be angry. They would lose the perfect rhythm he saw, and also, therefore, money. He noticed how each chair worked so closely. In some he saw they were making small items, probably drinking glasses, he guessed, asked Vic on following. As one took a small amount of fire from the furnace and blew a small bubble, another was twisting a small glass rod round and round in perfect time with the help of the gaffer, slightly like twisting hot cheese from toasted bread, only here very precise and thick and neat seeming, and much hotter it must be, he felt a sudden qualm. The third man then worked on with the blower of the team, and the rod was now joined onto the bubble. But the shape was just the bulb with what looked like a twisted stem attached. Something small was already being worked on again by the third man after the gaffer snipped off the correct length of the stem with the funny-shaped scissors he had already seen. And he worked on the proper size and shape of what was now really looking like a glass. Somehow, but still attached to a bulb, he couldn't quite see what they were doing from that well there. Oh, the part the third fellow had worked must have been the foot, which was now also attached, and after the gaffer had finally shaped it, the bulb was neatly broken into two, to form the actual bowl of the glass, and the finished item was put down on the side. How precise the process had been, as he saw the glass exactly the same shape and size as the previous one, which he saw now being picked up and taken away by the boy. But then his attention was taken up elsewhere. "Oh, over there in a team, a glass's foot was being properly shaped, he could see, with some contraption on a long rod held there. It all looked very odd. Then he couldn't see what was going on once more. Within seconds the finished item was left on the side with others. They'd surely been measuring as going along. Oh, yes. He saw again what looked like the compasses, but it was too quick. He couldn't tell properly. Then a boy came along with a long piece of wood with a notch in it. He put the notch on the stem of the red-hot glass just made and picked it up on the end of the wood before he walked away, carefully, but as quickly as he could, off and around the furnace. Harry couldn't see quite where, but when he came back, the new glass had gone. He'd left it somewhere. He saw another boy in a different chair do the same. As one glass was being put down by the gaffer, it looked like he was being sponged now and given a drink by the boy. Another blow of glass was well under way, being joined to the next stem that had arrived, and the gaffer was starting again. Perfect timing. Now, at another chair, another boy was carrying a newly made large bowl, hot and glowing away on a tray, very carefully, but skilfully, and avoiding all others in the cone. Now he was going out of sight round the central furnace. Yet another team were working the most beautiful item of all, a large, tall vase it seemed to be. It was taking a longer time, and truly was the most fabulous sight, from which, once he had seen it, he could not take his eyes away. How overwhelming he found it! That fiery light! What a phenomenon! Yet he now found himself pushing on the bricks of the outer walls, and even they were so hot it bathed him in sweat, just as much to touch them as not. But the air! It was so very thick with heat. As he breathed in, he felt its fury through his nose, going up, and it made his head swim just to do it. He didn't usually notice that he was breathing, but here he didn't like it. The air, the heat, made everything so different. The heat made everything so difficult that now he realized he was finding it hard just to lift up his eyelids. Oh no. No. Not me, no. But I don't want to breathe, and I can't not, and I don't want to open. He then tripped or stumbled over something in the strange half-light, and quickly realized it was a bucket of water, as it rushed like an angel sent to save him over his feet. It wasn't exactly cold, but fortunately it was a lot cooler than his feet had become, swelling in his best Sunday shoes. As the liquid gushed over them, he found that they squelched, but he couldn't have cared less. His toes were now just not quite so much like sausages on Jane's range. But momentarily, yes, it was almost as if there had been swift water from a stream running over him, even all over. It had seemed to feel, and the fact that it had only been a few seconds was murderous. Still, it was enough to prevent his fall into the depths. He realised only now that sweat was pouring down his face and all over his body, not in rivulets even, more like streams themselves, but it was not cold. Unfortunately, the sweat was very uncomfortably, meltingly hot. He took his jacket and cap off, mopping his brow for all he was worth. Oh dear! Best only a cambric handkerchief. He was just loosening his tie, so carefully tied. His neck piece, when someone spotted him and said, "Hello there, a visitor?" "Sort of," cried Harry, struggling to release himself from the now tortuous tie with the single hand he could allow, as he also tried to make sure he didn't fall at the same time. He realised that he had to raise his voice quite a bit against the workplace din, yet he hadn't noticed how noisy it was before. A monotonous but oppressively low roaring from somewhere below or in the centre, he couldn't tell, and now the several shouts as some of the workers were directing instructions to a lad not as so many years older than himself. Still, the pole he was blowing on looked only a little longer in his hands than it did in the men's, but not so unwieldy. But not unwieldy. The boy was being taught how to spin out a plate, probably. He hoped he wouldn't. I'm making a complete mess of this. It says he hoped he wouldn't make a mess of it, and I'm making a complete mess of this. In fact, the previous paragraph was dreadful. The boy was being taught how to spin out a plate, probably. He hoped he wouldn't make a mess of it when it came to his turn. But, oh no, the lad would nearly let it collapse. Then, wow, oh yes, he'd done it. Well done. He was now spinning it to a larger, flat sort of circle. A circular disc in a vaguely green hue, round and round. Oh, now so round. It was gorgeous. Breath taken away with sinful envy all of a sudden. Harry imagined himself steadily turning and turning the pole. Oh no! It had wobbled and nearly collapsed again. That's my fault, a voice told him through his innards. Still, as the lad managed to regain it once more, the others clapped. Aye, give praise where it is due, Harry thought. It was cracked off and put down, and now the lad was watching again as his gaffer performed the manoeuvre seemingly effortlessly, though he looked like an old man to Harry. A symmetrical, most wonderful orange, this one, and glowing, and he watched mesmerised as the seconds passed by and it was worked longer. A green tinge came and increased around the edge. The disc was now much larger than the lad had spun, and a narrow depression was being added to it as the young blower took over spinning, and the gaffer added the line with a tool, and another line. Steadily he was holding something up against it as it revolved, steady and straight. all around the edges. A blue tinge, a beautiful blue, was appearing where it had been green before. This blue and green hue, how strong and like magic it was becoming. Further inward, it was like that of a picture Harry had seen before. He liked looking at pictures, but what had it been? Ah, the sea near Italy in a geography book. Yes, it was exactly that colour, and this disc was now cracked off too. It was being laid down. Ah, careful, careful, oh! He helped them almost with the inarticulate sounds of his heart. It was more than wonderful. Then it was laid flat. Looked completely different then, almost like it had disappeared. Only a flat edge could he see. He jumped up to see it more. There it was, looking increasingly like a round, perfect blue pool you could dip your feet or your face in. Despite the heat and the effort involved, he jumped up to see it once more where it now lay. There it was again, now even more blue. He was entranced as it was carried away, finally, to wherever they put them. The man next to Harry bent his head down to talk to him after they had stopped watching this wondrous magic. "Fantastic, isn't it?" he said to the lad. His fellow's appearance was quite singular. So large, with blue eyes like the large plate, but a beetroot face and splodgy red sausage fingers. He made Harry feel small indeed, though extremely tall and well grown for his age. Harry was just as hot, but found he'd given up with the tie a long time ago. "I'm the new boy," he half shouted. "They sent me straight from the offices this morning. Bloody fools they are to send you down dressed like that and all. Just shows how they don't know where the bloody arses from their ankles are. Come on, follow me." And with that he turned on his heel to make his way out of the cone. He was still talking, yet Harry could only hear one word in three, as the sound got lost somewhere above his head, and it was so hard to hear, especially amid the strange underlayer of noise mingled with the sharp cracks from nearby teams breaking glass off rods every now and then, the shouts around, and then the sound went up into the cone, but above his head, and perhaps the heat had done something odd to his hearing. He just didn't know. It was so strange. He'd never experienced anything like this, and was near going over again. Now, very glad to be going out for a rest. He followed in the big man's wake. The burly beetroot was an overseer for both cones, it seemed. That's what it sounded like, he said, anyway. Then, vaguely pointing off to one side of the cone, he mentioned something very odd indeed. It sounded like kneeling, like in church kneeling down, he thought. Though what on earth kneeling down had to do with blowing glass, Harry couldn't fathom. He obviously had a lot to learn. Now reaching the corridor, the searing, sweat-making heat finally began to seem further behind them. With every step, once they were out of the cone, it receded little by little away from them. Then miraculously, and suddenly it seemed, they burst into a different world, like when swimming, your head under the water of the river near the farm, to when it pops back into the air, or coming out from under a spell. Not that Harry had ever been under a spell, he thought, but Aunt Jane had told him plenty of her countrywoman's stories about them when he'd been small, and this could beat them all. Blinking and squinting into the now slightly unfamiliar grey-white light of the Brierley Hill drizzle, Harry realised he'd never complain about the rain again, as it cooled his drenched, fiercely hot forehead and settled on his hair as though it was sizzling, although it surely was not from such a short time inside. Yet the still and humid early June shower now also made him shiver oddly. His companion noticed Harry's reaction and said calmly, "Oh, it does that. Like your head gets a bit mixed up. Can't go too hot from cold to hot and back. We're only flesh and blood. It'll pass. And you'll get more used to it, though it's a bugger on a frosty day. Sometimes I've had to stay in corridor cooling down for a quarter of an hour so as to be able to take the cold for fear of passing straight out on ground on my way home." He made it all sound normal, Harry thought, and he nodded in acknowledgement to his companion. A glass was handed to him, with which to get himself some small beer from a barrel in the shadows of the courtyard. "Go on," the man said. "Replace the sweat. We don't drink it strong. That gives a man a bad head for sure, and a greater first than when he started. Ooh, and then there are the aches and agues in the muscles all over if you drink too much. Next day, or for a few hours later even. Oh, they're bad. Don't get me wrong. A drink is nice, especially in company, but stick to small, as any more has consequences, especially more for glass workers, and that's a thing a man has to learn about. Consequences. Remember that. And here we don't put up with those who don't know." "Not at Sterling's," he said, shaking his large red head. You won't get any respect here for getting drunk too often. Respect here is all about skill and judgment, so we mind how we go. Nothing about religion or nowt, though folks as have a mind to dress it up so. Just this: if you're aching all over with a bad head, you'll make bad glass, and we don't do that here. Have you got it?" Harry nodded. "And boys watch their step too. Otherwise their hand'll shake and they'll drop something," he added, looking at Harry in a queer way that made him squirm in his soggy shoes. "And we don't take no cheek neither. I'll tell you that one time only. You can leave your cheek in the playground. It's time to grow up and become a man." And he seriously nodded his head at him. "Have you got it?" he said again. Yes, sir, I have." Then, his speech over, he promptly mopped his brow and slowly went over to a board with a piece of leather on it, hanging from a nail on the wall. He leant down to peer at a sheet of Sterling's paper underneath the leather. In doing so, he revealed a bald spot on the beetroot crown of his head, surrounded by short silver hair that strangely joined his silver-framed glass spectacles. They carried on, winding from his ears like a thin, shiny insect, or so it looked across the courtyard. The beetroot head popped up again. Harry? Harry Gaskell? Well, indeed. And he came straight back over, and after peering at Harry himself rather closely with his spectacles on for some time, he said seriously and slowly, or almost sadly, "Aye, just like your father, Harry, and your grandfather when he were young." After which he cleared his spectacles again. "So you're called young Harry, I expect?" he continued without waiting for an answer, as older people often did, Harry found. "It was a terrible shame about your father," he said, shaking his big beetroot top. "Went so much before his time, we all said." Aye, sad for us all, he said sincerely. "And your mother? Such a shame, such a bonny lass she'd been. All the Bartlett and Gaskell girls, such beauties." "Thank you, sir." Harry moved despite himself. "It was consumption, and little brother too." Oh, yes, lad. Aye, and that were a terrible thing too," he said, looking uncomfortable. He patted Harry on the shoulder. "The stokers do get their own cough, and, well, if the consumption sets in, they never last long." Sadly it intoned, with another shake of his head, and if you excuse my way of saying. "But your grandfather now," Higgs added consolingly. "Well, he's the best glass worker ever. The best glass worker here. And there's the touching for sure." He spoke as if he was still alive. Harry found it strange, but most comforting. Made him feel close to the man. The overseer polished his spectacles again now on his snowy white handkerchief, although it seemed one of the few clean articles about him. Harry glowed with pride, as well as with hate. The praise of his father and his grandad, and all the girls too. Jane was a Bartlett, with her own bonny country looks, as his fair mother had been, and become a Gaskell, and all the girls were destined to be handsome. In the large red hands of his companions the spectacles had steamed up yet again from the warmth of the man, just radiating from him, even though they'd been outside the cone so long now, and he'd had them on only such a short time. Perhaps it was how hot his hands were, Harry thought. The spectacles looked like playthings, quite fragile in his gripe. He repeated the whole polishing process again before. "And your family," he continued, "were a proper glass family, a proper Sterling's family. And you, you had the look on you in there. Oh, aye, watching, close like, to see what all were up to. Well, keep doing that, and that's how you learn at first." A short pause for breath, and here he was off again. "And never took a swoon, though you in your Sunday best?" A laugh. "I've never seen aught like it." He laughed again, and as he carried on, Harry felt better, laughing with him, because it did indeed seem very funny to him now he'd seen inside the cone, and how filthy sooty it was, and to be here in the Sunday go meetings. It was ridiculous. And now the inside of the cone, with its ferocious heat, was like another world, far, far away, as he cooled down, and took another swig at the small beer, which he really thought he had earned already that day. Feeling more like a man already, despite being smaller and a bit out of place next to the oversized overseer with his sooty trousers and rolled-up shirt. At this point, most of the chairs of men appeared from the corridor. Weary and I'm going to start that sentence again. At this point, most of the chairs of men appeared from the corridor. Weary and grimy, steamed up in sweat-sodden shirts, clomping into the yard with hobnailed dirty boots. Harry looked down at their bulky footwear in the light, wondering just how hot their feet must become. That afternoon being Friday, the pots were to be changed, and he pondered how on earth that happened with the terrific heat in the cone. For the men, the beer became their immediate For the men, I'm going to start this again. For the men, the beer became their immediate object. They cooled themselves in the rain a little, then, still steaming slightly, like the newfangled locomotives he had seen in Birmingham, they chatted to the overseer. "How do, Clary? Who's this then?" a man said, tussling Harry's hair with blackened fingernails. It seemed to Harry they knew already, with twinkle winks and nods from one to the other. "Our young Gaskell!" No, and it should be, "Our young Gaskell!" Clary announced formally, thumbs embraces like the mayor on marching days, when everything was relaxed at the picnic and the dancing had started. Yes, especially the way the words went up just a little at the end. Clary had the size and authority to carry this off, and Harry felt as if he had arrived in a package for them, like a present from a shop window, which in his marching day shirt it felt like, sort of. Hey! There were smiles and statements such as, "Good to have another Harry in our corn again." "Yeah, proper like." "By bloody hell." And, "We'll have some luck now there's a new Harry about the place." And the one that meant the most, "We missed you, Dad." Young and... "We missed your dad, young'un," from the oldest gaffers, looking amongst themselves with strange eyes. Aye, a rum do that, a rare rum do. I know I can't do a rich, broad Stourbridge accent. I know mine is Lancashire, so please excuse this, but I have to say this in the book. The rich, broad Stourbridge accent, half country, becoming more and more like the fast-growing city of Birmingham nearby, but still rolling those R's from Worcestershire well enough. He felt part of the tradition, continuing as such that his family had been for 4 generations of cutters, stokers and glass-blowers, and then of his mum too, who had come from the outer-lying country area of Wollaston, and had married into Stirling's, you could say, with her bonny looks and pleasant chatty nature, after having found enough initial work there with her education, then her steady hands and keen eye. If he'd only known it, she'd been the one they all wanted 15 or so years ago. Well, and he hadn't fainted, with a tie on, close up round his neck even, though he didn't want to think about just how close he had come, but his heart swelled with the pride of going in, as they called it, and knew it got easier. Next time they told him, wear a loose-fitting shirt and loose trousers, you'll feel cooler, but no sleeves too baggy, you might knock or stick to some glass. Expect to get dirty. There's enough soot to go around and then some, the men had laughed. And you'll follow Jamie Sullivan. He'd stayed in the cone that day till the last with his gaffer, making a parting gift for his girl, they smiled. Hoping might have a last parting gift for... Oh, I'm reading this bit terribly. This whole bit, I'm going to start again. The rich, broad Stourbridge accent, half country, becoming more and more like the fast-growing city of Birmingham nearby, but still rolling those Worcestershire R's well enough, which I can't obviously do. He felt part of the tradition, continuing as such, that his family had been for 4 generations, of cutters, stokers and glass blowers, and then of his mother too, who had come from the outer lying country area of Wollaston, and had married into Stirling's, you could say, with her bonny looks and country chatty nature. And after initial work there with her education, then her steady hands and a keen eye, if only he had known it. She had been the one they'd all wanted 15 or so years ago. And he hadn't fainted, with a tie on close up round his neck even, though he did not want to think about how close he had come, but his heart swelled with the pride of going in, as they called it, and knew that got easier. Next time, they told him, wear a loose-fitting shirt and loose trousers. You'd feel cooler, but no sleeves too baggy. You might knock or stick to some glass. Expect to get dirty. There's enough soot to go around and then some, the men had laughed. And you'll follow Jamie Sullivan. He had stayed in the cone till the last this Friday with his gaffer, making a parting gift for his girl, they smiled. Hoping she might have a last parting gift for him in return, I think, one said, winking and tapping the sides of his sooty nose with a knowing look and arched eyebrows. There was much laughter. He wasn't exactly sure what they meant, but smiled with them, nodding and pretending squarely that he did, and sharing a beer mug together. His heart swelled in this big group. Now I'm a real man. All next week he was to follow and watch only, starting on his own after that, for which news Harry was so relieved. He could feel it in his stomach as the knotted sick pull in there finally began to settle down. Hungry for the first time in days, when given leave to go, he raced down the road as if going home from school, planning to plunge a knife in a jar of this summer's jam to eat from the blade. He needed it so badly. Only Jane's swatting at him with a boiling cloth foiled the plan, and he waited most impatiently for the bread she had made that morning to cool enough to eat. It was funny, when just an hour before he had been a hot bun, or maybe a potato, cooling down after being in the oven like cone. When asked how long it would be for the bread, she made annoying mother noises like by and by and when it does, which was just not soon enough for Harry. Yet Jane finally took mercy after a while, seeing that he looked pale and was about to drop, and gave him a pie. But when the bread had cooled, with the jam and the new-made butter, oh, it was heaven. And then he needed more pie. Jane was her motherly best by now, saying it was about time he'd come to his starving, hungry self. She had nearly begun to worry. He thanked her with a kiss, too, and it was a bit of a catch-up, you could say, for all the pies she'd ever given him, which was a lot. Sterling's, Gaskell's, the cone. He could think and talk of nothing else. At tea that night he ate like making up for all time, told all about Thomas and his own non-interview with Mr. Smith, about the cone, but not everything, as he instinctively felt it should be kept mysterious to others. He also left out all the cussing and his own secret urge to join in, although it would take him some time to have the nerve himself, he thought, and he certainly did not mention the fact that he had nearly fainted. That night he lay in his own luxuriously underpopulated small bed, which on account of being the only male and a young man now, as his mother put it, he shared with no one, while the girls and even his mum and Jane talked and tailed. Thoughts were on fire. How fascinated he was with just, well, everything about making glass, and he wanted to do it, to learn how to make the most beautiful glass in the world, he thought, Sterling's glass. A sigh. The first contented sigh since before Dad had died. A Sterling's Gaskell. He had made it. He belonged. Felt he couldn't fail. And then he heard his other whispering voice as he remembered Clary's hard or meaningful looks at him, and his own trip over the bucket that morning. He mustn't fall. His tired but still excited mind finally let him sleep, while turning round and round the two options in perfect time, with the fantastic fiery blown green-blue glass disc that had mesmerised him so. He couldn't fail. He mustn't fall. He couldn't fail. He mustn't fall. He couldn't fail. He mustn't